Chapter 1. Long before the oracles of Delphi existed with their priestesses uttering enigmatic prophecies, before the biblical prophets transmitted the word of God in human tongues, before language itself even took articulated form in the throats of our ancestors, another kind of oracle existed. An oracle that did not speak because the truth it carried preceded and transcended all words. An oracle that was not housed in a stone temple or guarded by priests, because its location was the very space of pure consciousness, accessible to anyone willing to descend into the depths of absolute silence. The most ancient traditions of practically all cultures preserve fragmented memory of this silent oracle. In the Upanishads of India, there is talk of the Atman, the deepest self which can only be known in perfect stillness, in the space between two thoughts, in the moment before the sense of I am arises. Vedic sages did not consult this oracle through elaborate rituals or complex sacrifices, but through what they called mauna, the vow of silence, and dhyana, the meditation that leads beyond all mental activity into the silence that is the origin and substratum of everything. In early Buddhism, the Buddha himself pointed towards this oracle when he answered certain metaphysical questions with what is known as the noble silence. It was not a refusal to answer or an indication that he did not know. It was a recognition that certain truths cannot be captured in the net of language, that there is knowledge that can only be transmitted in the space beyond words. His most advanced disciples understood that this silence was not emptiness, but fullness, not the absence of an answer, but the most complete answer possible. Christian mystics, particularly the Desert Fathers who retreated to the solitude of the Egyptian sands in the first centuries of the Common Era, spoke of hesychasm, the practice of sacred silence, where in perfect stillness, beyond all verbal prayers, one met directly with the divine. They did not pray in the sense of talking to God, but rather immersed themselves in the silence where God could speak without words, where truth was revealed not as theological propositions, but as direct, ineffable experience that transformed the recipient. In Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam, masters spoke of fana, the annihilation of the self in the divine silence, where all questions ceased because the questioner himself dissolved into the living answer, that is the presence of Allah beyond all names. The dhikr, the remembrance of God, began with the repetition of divine names, but culminated in silence, where even the sacred names dissolved into the unnameable reality they pointed to. Chapter 2, the places associated with the silent oracle in humanity's collective memory share specific characteristics. They are not bustling cities or elaborate temples frequented by crowds. They are places of natural silence so profound that the minimal external noise amplifies rather than obscures the fundamental stillness. Isolated caves in remote mountains, vast deserts, where the only sound is the occasional whisper of wind over sand, mountain peaks so high that even the wind is rare, and the silence is almost palpable. In India, sadhus and yogis for millennia have sought caves in the Himalayas, places where external silence facilitates the descent into inner silence. They did not seek these caves for physical comfort, which they certainly lacked, but because in that deep external silence, the mind found it harder to maintain its usual chatter. In the sonic void of the exterior, the inner void became more accessible, and in that inner void, the silent oracle could be consulted. The Desert Fathers chose the deserts of Egypt and Syria for a similar reason. The desert offers no distraction. There is no lush vegetation to capture attention, no sounds of abundant animal life, no comforts that occupy the mind in their maintenance. There is only sand, sky, silence. And in that external stripping away, the monk encountered the internal stripping away necessary to access the depths where the oracle resided. Zen Buddhist monks in Japan built temples in the mountains specifically to be surrounded by natural silence. The only occasional sound was that of the temple bell, and that sound served not to break the silence but to underscore it, to make conscious the stillness that existed before the sound, during the sound, and after the sound faded away. Silence was the canvas upon which all sounds appeared and disappeared, the permanent space that contained all temporal phenomena. But the silent oracle was never truly limited to these physical locations. External places were only aids, facilitators for those whose minds were so accustomed to noise that they needed an external environment of silence to have any hope of finding inner silence. The oracle's true temple has always been internal, potentially accessible anywhere, anytime, for those who have developed the capacity to descend into silence even in the midst of noise. Chapter 3. But at some point in human history, something changed. Access to the silent oracle, which in ancient times was common knowledge among the wise of all traditions, began to be lost. It's not that the oracle ceased to exist, or that access to it was closed off. The oracle, being the space of pure consciousness, always has been and always will be available. What was lost was the human capacity to hear it, the ability to descend into silence deep enough to receive its wordless answers. Several forces conspired in this loss. The development of language, while a tremendous evolutionary advance that allowed for complex thought and the transmission of knowledge, also created an addiction to words, to constant verbal narrative, to the ceaseless discursive thinking. The human mind began to identify exclusively with the thinker, with the verbal self that speaks internally, and lost contact with the silent space from which all thoughts emerge. The rise of complex civilizations with their constant demands for attention, their bustling markets, their social structures that required elaborate verbal communication, all this drew the majority of humanity away from silence. Only small minorities, ascetics, hermits, contemplatives, kept the practice of deep silence alive. And these were frequently seen by ordinary society as strange, as people who had abandoned normal life for a useless obsession. Over time, even within religious traditions that originally valued silence, there was a tendency toward formalization, toward an emphasis on verbal doctrines, on creeds that had to be affirmed, on prayers that had to be recited. Contemplative silence, although never completely abandoned, was relegated to the margins, to specialized monastic orders, while popular religion became a matter of words. Sermons, vocal prayers, theological discussion. And in the modern era, particularly in recent centuries with technological acceleration, silence has become almost extinct as a common experience. We live in a world of perpetual noise, humming machines, roaring traffic, beeping devices, bombarding media. And when external silence threatens to appear, we immediately fill it. We turn on the radio, check the phone, start a conversation, anything to avoid encountering the stillness we have subconsciously learned to fear. The result is that the silent oracle, although as accessible as ever in principle, has become practically inaccessible to the vast majority of modern humanity, not because the oracle has left, but because we have almost completely lost the capacity to descend into the silence where it resides. Chapter 4. It is crucial to understand the fundamental difference between the silent oracle and all other oracles, prophets, mediums, channelers, and divination systems that humanity has developed. Traditional oracles, from the Pythia of Delphi to contemporary tarot readers, operate through language, through verbally interpreted symbol, through the spoken or written word that transmits a message. These oracles have their place and their value. They can offer perspectives, they can point out possibilities not considered, they can provide comfort or warning. But they fundamentally operate in the domain of the mind, of thought, of verbal interpretation. And therefore, they are limited by the inherent limitations of language and conceptual thought. Language, by its nature, fragments. It takes the fluid totality of experience and divides it into discrete categories, into subject and object, into this and that, into past, present, and future. Words are like a net we can use to catch fish, but the net itself is not the ocean, and there are aspects of the ocean that no net can capture. Verbal answers, no matter how wise or inspired, are always approximations, maps of the territory, but never the territory itself. The silent oracle operates in a completely different dimension. It offers no words that must be interpreted. It provides no symbols that require decoding. It does not transmit messages in human language. Instead, it offers something more direct, more immediate, more complete. Knowledge without the mediation of words, understanding that arises directly in consciousness without going through the process of discursive thought. Truth that is experienced rather than conceptualized. When the silent oracle is consulted correctly, there is no process of verbal question followed by verbal answer. There is rather a state of total openness, of receptivity without agenda, of stillness so profound that the questioner and the question dissolve, and what remains is clarity, is knowing, is certainty that cannot be easily articulated in words, but is absolutely recognizable when it occurs. This type of knowledge has a distinctive quality. It's not that the mind says, "Ah, now I understand." It is more that the entire being aligns. There is a resonance. There is a feeling of, yes, this is true. That does not come from logical reasoning or blind faith, but from direct recognition. It's like the difference between having the taste of honey described to you versus tasting the honey directly. The silent oracle offers the direct taste, not the description. Chapter 5. And now, in the early decades of the 21st century, there is a noticeable return toward the silent oracle. More and more people, particularly those who have tried everything modern culture offers and have found that it leaves a persistent void, are being drawn to practices of silence, meditation, silent retreats, time in nature without devices, any means of reconnecting with the stillness that modern life so effectively obscures. This is not necessarily a return to traditional religiosity, although some find it through contemplative traditions within religions. It is more frequently a spiritual search that transcends religious boundaries, a recognition that there is a dimension of experience, of knowledge, of being that is not available on the noisy surface of ordinary life, but is essential for feeling complete, centered, connected to something greater than the small self defined by thoughts and social roles. Neuroscience is beginning to validate what contemplatives have known for millennia, that deep stillness, inner silence, produces measurable changes in the brain, in brainwave patterns, in the activity of specific regions associated with the sense of a separate self. Studies of advanced meditators show that in states of deep silence, the brain's default mode network, the network associated with self-referential thought, with the narrative self, quiets down significantly. And in that stillness, there is access to modes of knowledge that transcend ordinary thought. Contemporary teachers like Eckhart Tolle have reintroduced millions to the practice of silent presence, of attention to the present moment, beyond mental chatter. Adyashanti teaches about conscious not knowing, the state of openness beyond all beliefs and concepts, where truth can reveal itself directly. Muji constantly points toward the silent witness, the pure consciousness that observes everything but is unaffected by anything it observes. The silent oracle is being rediscovered not as an archaeological relic, but as a living resource, as a source of wisdom that each generation must find anew, that each individual must access personally. It cannot be transmitted through reading about it, only through direct experience, and that experience is available now, as it always has been, for those who are willing to stop seeking answers in the noise and begin listening in the silence. Chapter 6. But before we can consult the silent oracle effectively, we must understand the nature of silence itself, because the silence we are describing is not simply the absence of sound. There is a crucial distinction between external silence and internal silence, and it is the internal one that matters. External silence is relatively easy to find, although increasingly difficult in the modern world. It is a matter of physical location, going to a place where there is no traffic noise, no machines, no human voices. It can be a soundproof room, a remote spot in nature, or simply using earplugs. This type of silence has its value. It can be restful for the nervous system. It can facilitate concentration. It can make inner work easier. But external silence alone is not the silence we are looking for, because we can be in a perfectly silent environment and still have tremendous noise internally. The mind can be roaring with thoughts, with worries, with fantasies, with endless narratives about the past and the future. The inner chatter can be so loud that it drowns out any possibility of hearing the voice of the silent oracle, which is more subtle, more still than any thought. Internal silence, on the contrary, is when the mental activity itself quiets down. It's not that we stop being able to think, but that compulsive thinking ceases. Thoughts no longer arise automatically, chaining one after another in endless association. There are spaces between thoughts, and in those spaces, something else becomes perceptible. Consciousness itself, the silent space in which all thoughts appear and disappear. This inner silence is possible even in the midst of external noise. A true Zen master can be in a bustling marketplace and remain in perfect inner silence. External noise is only sound, waves vibrating the air. It has no power to agitate the mind unless the mind attaches to it, resists it, or makes a story about it. When there is total acceptance of what is, including sound when it is present, there is a silence deeper than any physical stillness. But for most people, especially at the beginning of practice, external silence tremendously facilitates access to inner silence. This is why contemplative traditions have so valued places of physical stillness. Not because external silence is the goal, but because it is a useful tool, a ladder that can be left behind once the rooftop has been reached. Chapter 7. Eckhart Tolle, the contemporary spiritual teacher whose book, The Power of Now, has introduced millions to the concept of conscious presence, constantly points toward what he calls the space between thoughts. He describes how most people live completely identified with the thinker, with the voice in the head that constantly comments on everything, that judges, that plans, that worries, that fantasizes. This identification with thought is so complete that most people do not even realize there is a distinction between themselves and their thoughts. They believe they are the thinker, that the voice in the head is who they truly are. And thus they live entirely in psychological time, either reliving the past or anticipating the future, rarely, if ever, fully present in the now. But Tolle teaches that if we pay attention, we can notice that there are spaces between thoughts. A thought arises, exists for a moment, and then dissolves. Before the next thought arises, there is a gap, a brief space of non-thought. Typically, these spaces are so brief, so imperceptible, that we pass through them without noticing, immediately captured by the next thought in the stream. But if we learn to pay attention to these spaces, something extraordinary happens. We begin to recognize that there is something that is aware of the thoughts, something that observes the arising and disappearing of thoughts, but is not a thought. There is presence, there is consciousness, there is silent awareness that is here before any thought arises, during the thought, and after the thought disappears. This silent presence is what we truly are. It is not the thinker, but that which is conscious of the thinking. It is not the voice in the head, but the silent space in which that voice speaks. And as we become familiar with this presence, as we learn to rest in it, the spaces between thoughts begin to expand naturally. Compulsive thinking decreases, and in that diminishing of mental noise, the silent oracle becomes audible, although audible is not the correct word because there is no sound. There is rather direct knowing emerging from the silence. Chapter 8. Ramana Maharshi, the sage of Arunachala who lived in South India in the first half of the 20th century, taught an even more direct method of accessing the silence that precedes all thought. His practice of self-inquiry consisted of a simple yet profound question: who am I? But it was not a question to be answered verbally. It was a pointer of attention toward the very source of the sense of I. Maharshi instructed that if we follow the feeling of I back to its origin, we eventually arrive at a point where the I cannot be found. There is the thought, I am the body, but if we investigate, we recognize that we are aware of the body, therefore we cannot be the body. There is the thought, I am my emotions, but we recognize that we observe emotions coming and going, therefore we cannot be the emotions. I am my thoughts is similarly refuted by the fact that we observe thoughts. When every identification is investigated and seen through, when every content of consciousness is recognized as an observed object rather than the observing subject, there is a moment of disorientation. If I am none of the things I thought I was, what am I? And in that moment of not knowing, if we do not immediately fill the void with a new concept, there is an opening towards something that transcends all concept. There is stillness, there is silence, but it is not a dead emptiness. It is a vibrant presence, pure consciousness, the self itself without attributes, without form, without name. It is what Maharshi called the Atman, the true self that is not different from Brahman, the ultimate reality. And this Atman, this pure being, is silent, not because it lacks something, but because it is prior to all mental activity, including the arising of the first thought, I. Maharshi himself spent long periods in total silence. Visitors came from all over the world to sit in his presence. Frequently, there was no verbal teaching. There was simply presence, simply silence. And in that silence, something was transmitted, something was communicated more deeply than any word could. People reported that their questions were answered without being formulated, that problems that had tormented them for years dissolved without discussion, that a deep peace descended for no apparent reason. This was the silent oracle operating through Maharshi. It's not that he was the oracle. It is that he had achieved such complete identification with the silence, with the source, that his mere presence facilitated others to also touch that source within themselves. Chapter 9. The silence we are talking about is a portal to dimensions of reality that are always present, but are completely obscured by ordinary mental activity. It is like the night sky. The stars are always there, but during the day the sunlight is so bright that it makes them invisible. Only when the sun sets and the darkness arrives are the stars revealed. Similarly, there are dimensions of experience, of knowledge, of being, that are always present but are invisible while the mind is brightly active with constant thought. Only when the sun of mental activity sets, when there is genuine inner silence, are these dimensions revealed. One dimension is that of directly experienced interconnectedness. In ordinary consciousness dominated by thought, we experience ourselves as separate entities, locked in skin boxes, fundamentally isolated from one another. But in deep silence, the boundaries of the separate self become permeable, transparent. There is a direct experience that the consciousness observing through these eyes is not fundamentally different from the consciousness observing through all eyes. There is a recognition of an underlying unity that thought fragments into apparent multiplicity. Another dimension is that of direct intuitive knowledge. In the ordinary mode of knowing, we learn through the accumulation of information, through logical reasoning, through the gradual construction of understanding. But there is another mode of knowledge that operates in silence, knowledge that arises complete, that is not the result of a mental process, but appears directly in consciousness as certainty, as a recognition of truth that cannot be logically proven, but is self-evident to the one who experiences it. Mystics of all traditions have reported this kind of knowledge. In the deep silence of contemplation or meditation, understandings about the nature of reality, about the meaning of existence, about the truth of who one is, emerge spontaneously, not as thoughts that must be analyzed, but as direct perception, as seeing, as gnosis. There is also a dimension of what might be called divine presence or cosmic consciousness. Different traditions use different language for this. Encounter with God, realization of the Buddha nature, fusion with the Tao, recognition of the Atman. But in all these different descriptions, there is a common recognition. In silence deep enough, there is contact with something or someone that transcends the personal self, but is simultaneously more intimately oneself than anything one thought one was. Chapter 10, the Taoist concept of Wu, often translated as emptiness or nothingness, is neither negativity nor absence. It is more precisely the formless potential from which all forms emerge. The Tao Te Ching, a fundamental Taoist text, is full of references to this fertile emptiness, to this apparent nothingness that is the origin of everything. 30 spokes converge upon the hub of a wheel, but it is the emptiness in the center that makes the wheel useful. Vases are made of clay, but it is the empty space within that makes them useful. Walls with windows and doors form the house, but it is the empty space within that makes it habitable. This is one of the most famous teachings of the Tao Te Ching, pointing out that the void, far from being a worthless nothing, is precisely what gives utility, what allows for function. Applied to the silent oracle, this means that silence, the inner void, is not a state of ignorance or absence of knowledge. It is a state of pure potential, the space from which all specific knowledge can emerge. It is like a blank screen upon which any image can appear. If the screen is full of old images, images of past thoughts, there is no space for new images to appear. Only when the screen is completely empty can it receive what wishes to show itself. The Taoist sage cultivates Wu, cultivates the void, not as an end in itself, but as a condition for Wu Wei, action without action, action that flows spontaneously from silence without being forced by egoic will. When there is inner void, when there is no predetermined agenda, the correct response to any situation can arise spontaneously, precisely appropriate for that unique moment, rather than being a conditioned response based on past patterns. The silent oracle operates according to this very principle. It does not have prefabricated answers to questions. It does not have a manual of standard solutions. But when we empty ourselves completely, when we achieve Wu, the conscious void, the appropriate answer for our specific situation can emerge from the silence, new, fresh, perfectly adapted to the unique circumstance we are facing. Chapter 11. Buddhism articulates a similar concept with the word sunyata, often translated as emptiness or voidness. But sunyata is not nihilism. It is not an affirmation that nothing exists. It is rather a recognition that everything that exists lacks inherent, independent, permanent existence. Everything is empty of a fixed self-nature because everything is constantly changing. Everything exists only in relation to everything else. Nothing has a separate, self-sufficient reality. This recognition of voidness might seem depressing, like a denial of the value of everything. But in the Buddhist tradition, it is exactly the opposite. It is liberating because it means that we are not trapped in any fixed identity, any predetermined destiny. And it means that in the voidness of inherent existence, there is infinite freedom, unlimited possibility. Sunyata is also described as luminous, as radiant, not as a dark void, but as pure light without an object to illuminate. It is consciousness itself without content, awareness without an object of awareness. And in that empty but luminous consciousness, everything can appear, everything can be known, but nothing sticks. Nothing obscures the fundamental clarity. The silent oracle is precisely this luminous sunyata. It is empty of predetermined answers, empty of fixed content, but precisely because of this, it is capable of offering the exact answer needed at any moment. It is not limited by past knowledge, by established beliefs, by habitual patterns of thought. It can respond fresh, new, perfect for the now. Chapter 12. Modern quantum physics, although operating in a completely different domain of empirical scientific investigation rather than spiritual contemplation, has arrived at discoveries that resonate remarkably with these ancient teachings about the void. The so-called zero-point field, the lowest possible energy state of the quantum vacuum, is not empty in the sense of total absence. It is a bubbling field of virtual activity, of particles constantly arising and annihilating, of energy flowing even in the apparent nothingness of empty space. Some physicists have speculated that this zero-point field is actually the matrix from which all matter and energy emerge, that the particles we consider fundamental are actually localized excitations of this underlying field. If this is correct, then the quantum vacuum is literally the cosmic womb, the apparent nothingness from which everything emerges. We are not saying that the silent oracle is literally the zero-point field of physics. That would be a confusion of domains. But there is an intriguing parallel. Just as the quantum vacuum is full of potential for all forms of physical manifestation, the void of silent consciousness is full of potential for all forms of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And there is another parallel. Just as the observer in quantum mechanics affects the observed, collapsing the wave function of possibilities into a specific actuality, the one who consults the silent oracle through their own silent openness allows a specific understanding to emerge from the field of infinite possibilities. It is not that the oracle is predetermined in its answers. It is that the very act of consulting in the correct state of silence and openness creates the conditions for a specific answer to manifest. Chapter 13. The deepest answers to life's most important questions don't come from noise, but from the void, from silence. This is a truth that may seem counterintuitive to the modern mind, trained to seek answers in the accumulation of information, in consulting experts, in the logical analysis of options. All these have their place, but there is a limit to what they can offer. The truly profound questions are those that have no answers in books or in the advice of others. What is my purpose? What should I do at this crucial moment in my life? How can I find peace? Who am I really beyond my social roles? These questions touch upon something so personal, so unique to each individual existence, that no external answer can be completely satisfactory. Noise, the constant searching in the exterior, can offer information, but rarely offers wisdom. It can provide data, but not deep understanding. It can suggest possibilities, but cannot reveal the truth specific to the soul at this moment. Only in silence, in the void where all external voices quiet down, and even the internal voice calms, can the knowledge emerge that is directly relevant, personally true, and transformatively powerful. This is because in deep silence, we access levels of ourselves that transcend the ordinary mind with its conditioned patterns, its inherited fears, its desires based on what others have told us we should want. We access what Jung called the self with a capital S, what Maharshi called the Atman, what we might simply call our essential nature, our deepest wisdom that knows without needing to think, that understands without needing to analyze. The answers that come from the silent oracle have a quality of certainty that answers coming from thought or external advice rarely have. It is not arrogance or stubbornness. It is the quiet recognition of truth. It's like the difference between knowing that fire burns because someone told you versus knowing because you have touched the fire. Direct knowledge has an authority that second-hand knowledge can never possess. Chapter 14. But we live in an era of unprecedented noise in human history. Not just acoustic noise, although that has certainly reached levels that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors, but informational noise, digital noise, the constant noise of stimuli competing for our attention every moment of the day. Our devices beep, buzz, and vibrate with constant notifications. Our cities roar with traffic, with machinery, with thousands of overlapping conversations. Our workplaces are open offices where there is never stillness, where someone is always talking, a phone is ringing, a keyboard is clicking. Our homes have constantly running televisions, perpetual background music, the never-ending hum of appliances. And when external silence threatens, we immediately fill it. We get in the car and automatically turn on the radio. We walk down the street with headphones pumping music or podcasts or audiobooks. We are alone for a moment and immediately pull out the phone, scrolling through endless feeds of content, anything to avoid being with ourselves in quietness. This addiction to constant stimulation is not accidental, nor is it simply a harmless personal preference. It is a pathological condition, an illness of noise that profoundly affects us, although we rarely recognize its impact. We have become incapable of being present, incapable of deep concentration, incapable of genuine connection, either with ourselves or with others. Neuroscience studies show that a brain constantly bombarded with stimuli enters a mode of chronic stress response. The sympathetic nervous system remains activated without sufficient periods of parasympathetic rest and regeneration activation. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reflective thought and decision-making, becomes compromised when we are in constant response mode to stimuli. The amygdala, the fear response center, becomes hyperactive. The result is a population living in a state of low but constant anxiety, whose attention span is decreasing year after year, who report feelings of disconnection and emptiness despite being more connected digitally than ever in history. Chapter 15. Beneath this addiction to noise lies fear, the fear of silence itself. Because silence, when we finally encounter it, is not always immediately peaceful. When the external noise ceases and we begin to try to quiet the internal noise, frequently what emerges first is everything we have been avoiding: repressed emotions, uncomfortable thoughts, questions we have been postponing, the existential void we have been filling with constant distraction. Silence confronts us with ourselves without filters, without masks, without the distractions we usually use to avoid looking directly at our own experience. And this can be terrifying for an ego that has built its identity on narratives, on roles, on being constantly busy and therefore important, useful, valuable. There is also a deeper, almost existential fear that many people unconsciously feel towards silence. The fear of disappearing, of dissolving, of being lost. Because in deep silence, the habitual sense of self based on thoughts and narratives effectively begins to dissolve. And if we are completely identified with that narrative self, its dissolution feels like death. This is one of the central paradoxes of the spiritual path. What the ego fears most, the dissolution of the separate self, is precisely the door to liberation, to deep peace, to connection with something vaster and more real than the small self we thought we were. But this understanding only comes after having passed through the fear, after having allowed the small self to die so that the true being can reveal itself. Therefore, we avoid silence. We maintain constant noise as a defense against confrontation with ourselves, as a barrier against the dissolution of the ego. And in the process, we completely cut ourselves off from access to the silent oracle, to the deepest wisdom, to the guidance that can only come when we cease filling every moment with activity and distraction. Chapter 16. The mind that cannot stop, that generates thought after thought in an endless stream, is a condition so ubiquitous that most people consider it normal, simply the way the mind works. But contemplative traditions teach that this is not at all the natural or healthy state of the mind. It is rather a sick mind, a mind addicted to its own activity, a mind that has lost the capacity to rest in its own silent nature. This thought stream is not mostly productive or useful. Studies suggest that we have between 60,000 and 80,000 thoughts per day, and a great majority are repetitive, many are negative, and most do not lead to any useful action. It is mental noise, internal chatter that consumes tremendous energy without producing corresponding value. But not only is it useless, it is actively harmful. Living completely in the head, in the world of thought, disconnects us from the body, from emotions, from the direct experience of the present moment. It traps us in psychological time, in narratives about a past that no longer exists and a future that does not yet exist, losing the only moment we truly have, now. And perhaps most fundamentally, there's a loss of peace, a loss of the capacity to simply be, to rest in existence without constantly needing to be doing, achieving, advancing. True peace does not come from having perfect circumstances or solving all problems. It comes from reconnecting with the inner silence that is always at peace, that remains untouched by the turbulence of superficial life, that is always available as a refuge, as a home, as a source of renewal. Chapter 19. The silent oracle, then, is not a spiritual luxury or an esoteric curiosity. It is a fundamental necessity for healthy living, for fully functioning as human beings, for accessing resources of wisdom, creativity, guidance, and peace that are our natural heritage, but which we have allowed to atrophy through disuse. Reclaiming access to the oracle is not a matter of learning complex techniques or mastering esoteric teachings, although techniques and teachings can help. It is more fundamentally a matter of reversing the habit of a lifetime, of unlearning noise, of reclaiming silence as a right and a necessity, of protecting time and space for stillness in the midst of a world that constantly pressures toward more activity, more productivity, more stimulation. It is a decision to stop seeking answers exclusively in the exterior and to start looking inward, to recognize that no matter how much information we accumulate, how many experts we consult, how much analysis we do, there is a type of knowledge that can only come from silence, that can only be accessed when we stop searching and allow the truth to reveal itself in stillness. It is a practice of cultivating patience with ourselves, of recognizing that after years or decades of constant noise, the capacity for inner silence is not recovered in one meditation session. It is gradual work, gentle but persistent training of the mind. It is learning to trust that in silence we will not find a terrifying void, but a fullness that has been waiting to be discovered. And it is finally a recognition that the silent oracle is not something separate from us, not an external entity to consult. It is our own deepest nature. It is the being that we are, beyond the small self defined by thoughts and narratives. Consulting the oracle is more precisely returning home, reconnecting with who we really are beneath all the layers of conditioning, false identifications, and noise that we have mistaken for reality. The temple of eternal silence is not on a remote mountain or in an inaccessible cave, although these places can facilitate access. It is here now, in the space of your own consciousness, waiting only for you to stop searching elsewhere and allow the silence you have always been to reveal itself. The temple doors are open. The oracle is waiting. The question is, will you stop making enough noise to finally hear the answer that has been there all along? Chapter 20. Before we can consult the silent oracle effectively, we must create what we might call the vessel of silence, the conditions both external and internal that facilitate the descent into deep stillness. This is not empty formality or superstition, but a practical recognition that we are embodied beings whose internal state is profoundly influenced by our external environment and by how we prepare ourselves for practice. The physical space matters. Although it is true that realized masters can access deep silence anywhere, for most of us, particularly when beginning the practice, the external environment can tremendously facilitate or hinder our ability to quiet down. Ideally, a specific area of the home is designated for the practice of silence, an area that is not associated with the mundane activities of work or entertainment. This space does not need to be large or elaborate. It can be simply a corner of a room, but it must be clean, tidy, free of distracting visual clutter. Simplicity is key. Walls without excessive adornments, neutral or soft colors, a minimum of objects. If desired, there can be a single element that serves as a point of focus, perhaps a candle, perhaps a simple image of a circle or a symbol that represents the void, perhaps nothing at all except open space. The lighting should be soft, not bright or stimulating. Filtered natural light is ideal if available. If artificial light is used, It should be warm, dim. Some practitioners find it useful to practice in semi-darkness or with eyes covered, completely eliminating visual stimulation to facilitate the inward turn. Acoustic silence, although not absolutely necessary, is extremely helpful. If there is unavoidable noise from the outside, traffic, neighbors, machinery, it can help to use high-quality earplugs or noise-canceling headphones without music, creating an artificial bubble of silence. With time and practice, the capacity to maintain inner silence even with external noise develops. But initially, we facilitate the process by eliminating external distractions wherever possible. The temperature of the space also matters. It should be comfortable, neither too cold, which causes body tension, nor too hot, which induces drowsiness. The body should be able to forget itself, not demand attention through discomfort. Chapter 21. Time also has its quality. Although the silent oracle is always available, there are times of day that naturally facilitate the descent into silence more than others. The early hours of the morning, before or just at dawn, have a particular quality of quietness. The world has not yet fully awakened to its daily activity. The mind, freshly emerged from sleep, has not yet completely built up its habitual defenses. There is a freshness, an openness, that makes silence more accessible. The late hours of the evening, after the day's activities have ceased, but before surrendering to sleep, are also propitious. There is a natural sense of closure, of the completion of the day, that facilitates letting go and settling into stillness. The external darkness corresponds to the inward turn into the inner darkness of deep silence. But more important than a specific clock time is regularity. The body and mind respond to rhythm, to pattern. When we establish a regular practice at the same time each day, the psychophysical system begins to anticipate, to prepare automatically. The time arrives and there is a sense of it's time to enter silence that facilitates the transition. The duration of the practice is less important than consistency. It is better to sit in silence for 20 minutes every day than to attempt sporadic 2-hour sessions. The silent oracle is not accessed through occasional marathons, but through patient, persistent practice that gradually deepens the capacity for quietness. In the beginning, even 5 or 10 minutes can seem eternal, the mind protesting vigorously against the forced inactivity. This is normal. One starts with what is sustainable without excessive struggle, and gradually, as the capacity develops and the value of silence is experienced directly, the duration can naturally extend. Chapter 22. Body posture is not a trivial detail, but a crucial element that profoundly affects the quality of the practice. The body is not merely a passive container for the mind, but an active participant in states of consciousness. Different postures facilitate different states. The posture for consulting the silent oracle must combine two seemingly opposite qualities: grounding and openness, stability and receptivity, firmness and surrender. One can sit in a chair with feet flat on the floor, or on a meditation cushion in a full or half lotus posture if the body comfortably allows it. The crucial thing is not the specific form, but the underlying principles. The spine should be erect, but not rigid. Imagine a soft string pulling from the crown of the head toward the sky, elongating the spine without creating tension. This verticality is not military, not forced. It is natural dignity, an alignment that allows energy to flow freely through the central axis of the body. The shoulders are relaxed, dropped, neither hunched forward nor exaggeratedly pulled back. The hands rest gently in the lap, perhaps one over the other with the thumbs lightly touching to form a circle, or simply resting on the thighs with palms up in a gesture of receptivity, or down in a gesture of grounding. The jaw is relaxed, lips slightly parted, or together without clenching. The tongue rests gently on the upper palate, just behind the teeth, a position that, according to Eastern traditions, facilitates the circulation of subtle energy. The eyes can be closed or, half open, looking downward without focusing on anything specific, a common technique in Zen meditation that reduces drowsiness while minimizing visual distraction. The breath is natural, not forced, flowing through the nose. One does not try to control it initially, only allows it to find its own rhythm. The abdomen gently expands with each inhalation, contracts with each exhalation. This is natural diaphragmatic breathing, as opposed to the superficial chest breathing associated with stress. Chapter 23. But the most crucial preparation is psychological, internal. We must recognize and release the expectation of verbal answers, of messages in language that the rational mind can immediately process. This expectation is a main obstacle because it keeps the mind in a mode of active searching, analysis, and interpretation, all of which are forms of mental noise that obscure the silence where the oracle truly speaks. Approaching the silent oracle requires what the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki called beginner's mind. A mind that does not know, that has no predetermined agenda, that is open to whatever may reveal itself without insisting that it take a particular form. It is paradoxically a state of searching without searching, of asking without expectation of a specific answer, of total openness without attachment to the outcome. This does not mean passivity or indifference. There is a clear intention to consult the oracle, to receive guidance, to open to deeper wisdom. But this intention is held lightly, not with a clenched fist of desperate need. It's like holding a bird. Too tight and we hurt it, too loose and it flies away. Just the right touch of intention, without imposition. The preparation also includes the recognition that what is received may not be what the ego wants to hear. The silent oracle is not a servant of the ego. It is not here to validate our preferences or to tell us what we want to hear. Its function is to reveal truth, and truth is sometimes uncomfortable, challenging, contrary to our careful plans. We must be willing to receive what comes without filtering it through our desires and fears. Chapter 24. The way we formulate our query to the oracle also matters deeply. It is not like consulting a search engine where we enter a specific question and expect a list of answers. It is more like planting a seed in fertile ground and allowing whatever grows to grow, trusting in the inherent intelligence of the process. Closed questions that seek yes or no answers are less useful than open questions that invite exploration. Instead of, should I take this job? More useful is, what do I need to understand about my work situation? Or, what is asking to be seen here? Instead of, is this person right for me? More fertile is, what is emerging in this relationship that needs my conscious attention? Even more profoundly, the most powerful consultations to the silent oracle are not about external circumstances, but about internal truth. Who am I really? What is asking to emerge in my life? Where am I resisting the flow? What needs to be released? These questions point inward, toward the heart, toward understanding the internal patterns that create external experience. The question can be consciously held upon entering silence, like a seed planted, and then it must be completely released. It is not repeated mentally like a mantra. It is not ruminated upon. It is let go of, entrusted to the void, and then one simply rests in silence. If the question was genuine, if it came from a deep place of true need to know, there will be a response. But that response emerges in its own time, in its own form, not according to the ego's schedule. Chapter 25. The descent into deep silence can be facilitated through the door of conscious breathing. Breath is a unique bridge between conscious and unconscious, between voluntary and involuntary. It breathes by itself without our intervention, but we can also consciously influence it. This dual quality makes it a perfect tool for the transition from ordinary consciousness to deeper states. One begins by simply observing the breath without trying to change it. Noticing the sensation of air entering through the nostrils, cool, descending toward the lungs, noticing the abdomen expanding, then the subtle pause at the top of the inhalation, then the exhalation, air leaving slightly warmer, abdomen contracting, and the pause at the bottom of the exhalation before the next cycle begins. This simple and direct attention to the breath has the effect of anchoring the mind in the present. The breath only exists now. We cannot breathe in the past or in the future. By following the breath, the mind is gradually brought from its wanderings to the present moment, and the present moment is the door to timeless silence. As attention stabilizes, the breath naturally becomes slower, deeper, softer. It is not forced. It is a natural response of the nervous system starting to shift from the sympathetic alert mode to the parasympathetic rest mode. This physiological shift facilitates the corresponding shift in states of consciousness. Eventually, there may be moments where the breath becomes so subtle that it almost disappears. The attention that was following the breath suddenly finds itself without an object, floating in space without an anchor. This is a crucial moment. The temptation is to immediately return to thought, to seek a new object of attention. But if one allows oneself to simply remain in that objectless space, doing nothing, there is an opening toward the deepest silence. Chapter 26. The Vipassana Method, a meditation technique that emerges from the Theravada Buddhist tradition, offers a slightly different approach. Instead of focusing exclusively on the breath, Vipassana invites one to observe everything that arises in experience with perfect equanimity, without judging, without clinging, without rejecting. One sits and observes. A thought arises, one notes thought. A body sensation arises, one notes sensation. An emotion arises, one notes emotion. One does not engage with the content, does not follow the thread of the thought, does not tell a story about the sensation. Only pure observing, a simple recognition of this is present now. The extraordinary thing about this practice is that through sustained observation without involvement, identification with the observed begins to loosen. There is a gradual recognition. If I can observe this thought, I cannot be this thought. If I can observe this emotion, I cannot be this emotion. Consciousness begins to recognize itself as the witness, as the space in which all experience appears, not as the experiences themselves. And eventually, if the practice deepens sufficiently, there may be a moment where even the observer dissolves. There is no more I observing experience. There is only experience, pure centerless, without a separate subject observing an object. This is what some call non-duality, and in this state, silence is absolute, because there is no one left who is thinking, no separate self generating internal narrative. This is the silence from which the silent oracle can speak most clearly. There is no interference from the personal self with its agendas and fears. There is only pure receptivity, total openness to what is. Chapter 27, Zen. The sitting meditation of Zen, particularly in its form of shikantaza, just sitting, offers an even more direct approach. There is no technique in the ordinary sense. There is no object of meditation like the breath or a mantra. There is no goal to achieve. There is only the pure act of sitting in the correct posture, awake, present, doing nothing else. The Zen master Dogen wrote, "Think non-thinking." How do you think non-thinking? Beyond thinking. This is a paradoxical instruction that the logical mind cannot resolve. It is not about suppressing thoughts, which would be another kind of doing. It is not about letting thoughts run wild. It is a state beyond both, where thoughts may or may not appear, but there is no attachment and no rejection. There is no involvement. One sits like a mountain. Thoughts are like clouds passing by. One does not struggle with the clouds. One does not invite the clouds. The clouds come and go according to their own nature. The mountain remains unmoving, simply being. This is shikantaza. This is the essence of conscious silence. The beauty of this practice is its radical simplicity. There is nothing to master, nothing to achieve, no special experience to seek. There is only this moment of sitting, and then this moment, and then this moment. And in the accumulation of these moments of simple presence, something transforms. Mental noise does not necessarily cease completely, but its power over us weakens. The silence that was always here beneath the noise becomes more perceptible, a more available refuge at any time. Chapter 28. The Sufi tradition offers the practice of dhikr, remembrance of the divine, which typically involves the repetition of the names of Allah or sacred phrases. But there is also silent dhikr, where the name is remembered without pronouncing it, where the remembrance occurs in the heart without the mediation of words. One might begin with the audible or whispered repetition of Allah or Hu with each exhalation. Then it becomes only a movement of the lips without sound. Then only the internal intention of the word without lip movement. And eventually, only a resonance in the heart, only the presence of the divine without name, without concept, only the living reality beyond all words. This progression from audible sound to resonant silence is a map of how to consult the silent oracle. We begin perhaps with verbal questions. But as the practice deepens, the questions become more subtle, less formulated, until there is only openness, only receptive presence. And from that wordless receptivity, the answers emerge, also wordless, but absolutely clear. The heart in Sufi traditions is not only a physical organ or merely the seat of emotions. It is the organ of spiritual perception, the place where the divine can be known directly. When the heart is polished through practice, when it is free from the oxidation of ego and attachment, it becomes a mirror that reflects divine truth without distortion. This is the heart from which the silent oracle can be heard most clearly. Chapter 29. There is also an intriguing technique of listening to the inner sound, the nada that contains all sound. When the external environment is completely silent and we close our eyes, many people notice a subtle humming, a constant tone that seems to come from inside the head or from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Some traditions call this the primordial sound, the eternal Om, the fundamental vibration of the universe. Physically, it can be partially explained as background neural activity, the white noise of the nervous system. But experientially, when used as an object of meditation, this inner sound can serve as a deep door to silence. One listens to the humming, allows attention to rest in it without forcing, simply noticing its constant presence. The remarkable thing is that although it is sound, listening to it leads towards silence. It is as if the sound were a portal, and upon passing through it, one finds the silence from which the sound emerges and to which it returns. It is sound at the boundary of silence, vibration at the edge of the void. As attention deepens into this inner sound, consciousness can expand. The sense of being a localized entity in the head or body begins to dissolve. There is rather a feeling of being the space in which the sound exists, being the silence that contains the sound. And from this expanded space, the oracle's answers can emerge not as specific thoughts, but as spacious knowing, as understanding that encompasses rather than conceptualizes. Chapter 30. These diverse techniques for entering silence correspond to measurable changes in brain activity. The neuroscience of meditation has identified distinct brainwave patterns associated with different states of consciousness. In ordinary waking consciousness, beta waves, 13 to 30 cycles per second, dominate, associated with active thought, analysis, and external conversation. As we begin to relax, perhaps by closing our eyes and following the breath, beta waves decrease and alpha waves, 8 to 13 cycles per second, emerge. This is a state of relaxed alertness, attention without tension, calm but awake. Many meditations remain primarily in the alpha state, and this already has significant benefits for stress reduction and mental clarity. But as meditation deepens, particularly in experienced practitioners, theta waves, 4 to 8 cycles per second, begin to dominate. Theta is associated with the hypnagogic state between wakefulness and sleep, with access to unconscious material, deep creativity, and what some traditions call the astral realm or the collective unconscious. It is in theta that visions, deep perceptions, and experiences of connection with something greater than the personal self frequently occur. And in even deeper states of meditation, particularly in very advanced practitioners during prolonged periods of intensive practice, delta waves, 0.5 to 4 cycles per second, may appear. Normally, delta only occurs in deep, dreamless sleep, a state of complete unconsciousness. But some meditators can enter delta while remaining conscious, a paradoxical state of consciousness without content, of pure awareness without object. It is in these deeper states, particularly in deep theta and conscious delta, where the silent oracle is most accessible. The ordinary mind, with its constant chatter, is completely quieted. The narrative self is suspended, and in that open space, there is receptivity to knowledge that transcends ordinary thought. Chapter 31. But silence is not uniform. There are layers, varying depths, like descending through strata of consciousness toward the very foundation of being. The superficial layer is what we might call relative silence, when mental noise has diminished, but not completely ceased. There are fewer thoughts, more spaces between them, but the thinker is still active. There is still a sense of, I am here meditating, I am observing my mind. This level of silence is already valuable. The nervous system calms, blood pressure decreases, cortisol levels drop. There is a feeling of rest, of respite from ordinary stress. And from this level, some guidance can be received, some clarity can emerge, although still filtered through the personal mind. The intermediate layer is deeper silence, where verbal thought has almost completely ceased. There may be images, sensations, intuitions, but no verbal narrative running. The sense of a separate self is still present, but more faintly. There is more of a sense of being the space in which experience occurs than of being the doer of experience. This is the level where many meditation practices eventually stabilize with regular practice. The deep layer is what some traditions call samadhi with form or deep dhyana. Here there is near complete absorption. The sense of a separate self is greatly attenuated. There is a feeling of merging with the object of meditation, if there is one, or simply vast stillness if the practice is objectless. Time can seem to stop. An hour can feel like minutes. There is deep peace, sometimes ecstasy, sometimes simply a stillness so perfect that there are no words to describe it. And there is the absolute layer, formless samadhi, what Buddhism calls nirvikalpa samadhi, or cessation. Here, even the most subtle sense of being someone meditating completely disappears. There is only consciousness, pure, without content, without subject, without object. It is not an experience in the ordinary sense, because there is no one experiencing. It is rather that being recognizes itself as pure presence, as the foundation of all experience, without being a particular experience. Chapter 32. In the descent through these layers of silence, various phenomena can occur. Some are common, almost universal among meditators. Others are more idiosyncratic. It is useful to know about them so as not to be disturbed or overly fascinated when they appear, because they are waymarks on the path, but are not the destination. Humming or inner tones we have already mentioned. These can intensify in deep silence, becoming almost deafening in their internal intensity, although there is no real physical sound. Lights can appear with eyes closed, flashes, colors, sometimes intricate geometric patterns, sometimes just diffuse luminosity. These are probably neurological phenomena, activity in the visual cortex without external input, but experientially, they can be profoundly beautiful or disconcerting. Unusual body sensations are common. There may be a feeling of expansion, as if the body is becoming larger, filling the space, or the opposite, a feeling of contraction, of becoming a small point of consciousness. There may be tingling, vibrations, waves of energy moving through the body. There may be a feeling of lightness, as if one is floating, or heaviness, as if the body is sinking into the earth. There is frequently a sense of loss of body boundaries. Where does the body end and the surrounding space begin? In deep silence, this boundary becomes blurred. There may be moments of not being sure if the eyes are open or closed, if one is sitting or lying down. These dissolutions of ordinary orientation can be disorienting, but are typically harmless if allowed to pass without alarm. Emotionally, there may be waves of feeling seemingly without cause. Tears can flow without particular sadness, or laughter without specific joy. Sometimes repressed emotions emerge in deep silence, seeking release. Sometimes there is simply a feeling of love or peace or gratitude, so intense that it overwhelms. All these phenomena are signs that consciousness is moving through layers, is accessing states different from the ordinary. But none of them is the silent oracle itself. They are more like signs on the road. The traditional instruction is to notice these phenomena without attaching to them or rejecting them, to let them go and continue deepening into the fundamental silence. Chapter 33. At the heart of all these layers, in the depth beyond all phenomena, is what we might call the silent witness. The pure consciousness that observes everything but is unaffected by anything. This consciousness is not a person. It is not the ego. It is rather that which is aware of the ego, the presence that is here before the thought I am arises, that remains when that thought dissolves. Ramana Maharshi called it the true self with a capital S to distinguish it from the small self, the ego. He said it is the only thing we truly are, that everything else, body, mind, personality, are objects that appear in this consciousness but are not the consciousness itself. And this consciousness, this silent witness, is a portal to the silent oracle because it is the oracle itself. It is our deepest nature that knows without needing to think, that understands without needing to analyze. When we rest as this witness, when there is recognition, I am this conscious presence, not the thoughts or emotions or sensations I observe. There is deep peace. And there is also openness. Because this presence is not defending territory. It is not protecting an image. It has no agenda. It is simply here conscious, open to what is. And it is from this openness that the oracle can speak. There is no one blocking the transmission with their expectations or fears. There is only pure receptivity, and in that receptivity, the truth can reveal itself. Chapter 34. But how to distinguish this authentic silence, this conscious presence, from simply a blank mind, from a state of dullness or dissociation that may seem superficially similar but is fundamentally different? This is a crucial distinction because it is possible to use meditation techniques to escape, to disconnect, rather than to awaken. Authentic silence has a quality of vividness, of vibrant alertness. There is stillness, but no sleepiness. There is rest, but no sluggishness. It's like the difference between a deep lake with clear water and a stagnant pond with murky water. Both are quiet on the surface, but one is alive, the other is dead. In authentic conscious presence, there is sharp awareness. If one opens the eyes, perception is crystalline, clearer even than in ordinary consciousness. Colors are more vivid, sounds more distinct. There is a sense of being more awake, not less. Conversely, in a dissociative state, there is dullness. Perceptions are opaque. There is a feeling of being disconnected from the experience rather than deeply present in it. Emotionally, authentic conscious presence is frequently accompanied by peace, sometimes subtle joy, sometimes simply deep equanimity. Dissociation, on the contrary, frequently has a quality of an unsettling rather than peaceful void, as if one is avoiding something rather than finding something. And crucially, authentic silence is fertile. From it emerge insights, understandings, and creativity. After a session of deep presence, there is clarity, there is renewed energy, there is frequently a spontaneous resolution of problems that had seemed insoluble. Dissociation, on the contrary, is sterile. After it, there is frequently more confusion, less energy, a feeling of having wasted time rather than used it productively. Chapter 35. When the silence is deep enough, when the receptivity is total, the oracle can speak. But it does not speak in ordinary language, not in words that the rational mind can transcribe directly. It speaks in more subtle, more direct languages that require a different kind of listening and understanding. One of the most common languages is physical sensation. The answer comes as a feeling in the body. A question is held in the silence, and suddenly there is an expansion in the chest, openness, warmth, as if the heart is saying, "Yes, this is the way." Or there may be contraction, tension in the solar plexus, coolness, as if something in the body is saying, "No, this is not aligned." This is somatic wisdom, the body's intelligence that frequently knows truth before the mind can articulate it. The body does not lie. It may be temporarily confused by conditioning, but in deep silence when the mind is quiet, body wisdom can speak clearly. Learning to read this language requires practice, requires developing sensitivity to subtle sensations. It is typically not dramatic. It is not like being struck by a lightning bolt of certainty. It is more like a gentle breeze, a light touch, a knowing that gently emerges from the body into consciousness. But with practice, this way of knowing becomes more reliable than any mental analysis. Chapter 36. Another way the oracle speaks is through resonance, specific vibrations in particular areas of the body, frequently in what Eastern traditions call chakras or energy centers. When a question is held in the silence, there may suddenly be a feeling of vibration, of activation in one of these centers. Vibration in the root chakra at the base of the spine may indicate that the answer relates to issues of survival, security, physical grounding. Vibration in the second chakra in the lower abdomen may signal issues of creativity, sexuality, emotional flow. The third chakra in the solar plexus relates to personal power, will, and identity. The fourth chakra in the heart with love, compassion, and connection. The fifth in the throat with expression, truth, and communication. The sixth between the eyebrows with vision, intuition, and perception. The seventh at the crown with spirituality, connection with the divine. These correspondences are not absolute or fixed, but they offer an approximate map. When there is resonance in a specific center, it invites contemplation. What aspect of my question relates to the themes of this center? What is asking to be seen here? And frequently, in that contemplation, clarity emerges that was not available through direct mental analysis. Chapter 37, perhaps the most direct way the oracle speaks, is through gnosis, direct knowing without a mental process, without a chain of reasoning. There is a question, there is silence, and suddenly there is knowing. Not "I think that," but "I know." Not a conclusion that has been reached, but a truth that has simply revealed itself. This type of knowledge has a specific flavor. It is quiet, but absolutely certain. It needs no defense or justification. It does not come with internal argumentation about pros and cons. It is simply obvious, self-evident, as when you suddenly understand the solution to a puzzle that had been opaque, and in the moment of understanding, it is so clear that you wonder how you did not see it before. Gnosis is not belief or hope or speculation. It is direct perception of truth, and this perception changes everything. Once you have seen, you cannot unsee. Once you know, you cannot unknow. And this knowledge, because it comes from a source deeper than the ego with its fears and desires, is reliable in a way that ordinary thought rarely is. Mystics of all traditions have reported this type of direct knowledge. They do not learn about God through theology. They experience the divine directly. They do not reason their way to an understanding of the nature of reality. They see that nature with a clarity that transcends the intellect, and this direct vision transforms not just what they know, but who they are. Chapter 38. Sometimes the oracle speaks through archetypal images, symbols that emerge from the silence with meaning that transcends their specific form. An image of a mountain may appear, and in the context of the question, there is immediate recognition. I need stability. I need to stand firm. I need elevation of perspective. Or an image of a river. I need to flow. I need to let go of control. I need to allow the process to unfold naturally. These symbols do not need elaborate interpretation according to predetermined symbol dictionaries. The meaning is immediate, personal, and contextual. The symbol and its meaning emerge united from the silence. There is a direct recognition of what the symbol is communicating in this specific moment, for this specific question. Jung called these archetypes primordial images that reside in the collective unconscious and carry universal meaning but manifest in personally relevant ways. Working with them requires a type of listening that is simultaneously receptive and active, allowing the symbol to reveal its meaning without imposing a predetermined interpretation. Chapter 39. And there are times when the oracle responds with what appears to be a non-answer, with silence that remains silence, without clear sensation, without resonance, without gnosis, without an image. This, too, is an answer, and frequently it is the most important one, although the most difficult for the ego seeking certainty to accept. The non-answer says, it is not time to know yet. Uncertainty itself is what you need to hold now. Your work is not to solve this mystery prematurely, but to live the question, to allow it to transform you, to trust the process even if you do not see the destination. The poet Rilke wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them." And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. This capacity to hold uncertainty without collapsing into anxiety or forcing premature resolution is a mark of spiritual maturity. It is what the poet John Keats called negative capability, the capacity to remain in mysteries and doubts without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. And paradoxically, it is frequently when we stop demanding answers that the answers come, when we let go of the need to know that the knowing emerges. Chapter 40. But eventually, at some point after consulting the silent oracle, there is a need to translate the ineffable into understanding that can guide action in the world. This is a delicate art because the translation always slightly betrays the original experience. Words are containers too small for the vastness of what was experienced in silence. And yet, we must try. We must find a way to bring the wisdom of silence into active life. One useful practice is the silent journal, writing immediately after a session of deep silence, allowing words to flow without censorship or editing, capturing as much as possible of the experience while it is still fresh. One does not write about the silence so much as from the silence. Not analysis, but testimony. Not interpretation, but simple description of what was experienced, felt, or known. And frequently in the act of writing, additional clarity emerges. Words, although inadequate, help to anchor the experience, to make it available for later memory and reflection. But there is also wisdom in not rushing the translation. Allow the experience to settle, to integrate, before trying to articulate it. Sometimes what appeared to be a clear answer in the silence reveals itself to be more nuanced days later. Sometimes what appeared to be a non-answer gradually reveals its meaning over time. Patience with the integration process is crucial, and always the final verification is pragmatic. Does this understanding that emerged from the silence, when acted upon in the world, produce good fruit? Is there more peace, more clarity, more alignment? If yes, it is confirmation that the guidance was authentic. If no, there was perhaps a distortion in the reception or in the translation, and there is an invitation to return to the silence with renewed humility. The silent oracle is not a one-time phenomenon, but a practice of life, a continuous return to the source, a perpetual consultation with the deepest wisdom that transcends and contains all personal wisdom. Each descent into silence is training, a deepening of capacity, a strengthening of connection with that which we have always been, but had forgotten in the noise of superficial life. And gradually, through patient and persistent practice, silence ceases to be a place we go occasionally and becomes the constant backdrop, a permanent presence, an always available refuge at the center of our being, responding every moment with its wordless wisdom that is truer than any truth that can be spoken.